fortresses in the stars. A circle of 6, but they sleep yet and must be awakened. Ride upon the storms of chaos. Gather your rivals around you. Send discord and terror throughout 1,000 worlds. Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos.
I managed to get this beauty from a gentleman off of Facebook probably about 2, maybe 3 years ago. I hadn't really opened it or messed with it at all, and so that's what I'm going to be doing today. As you can see, because this is an older model, obviously, GW packages things way different now than they used to. They have all this wasted space in here, but they spread out the model in a good way, and there's lots of little parts. So I'm going to take these out and get cleaning, and then we'll get to assembly. So I got all of the parts out, and I managed to go through and clip all of the extra little pieces off and get rid of any extra sort of flash on there. And I did that. The flash I got rid of using my Dremel. I definitely recommend getting one of these bad boys if you don't have one. They have diamond tip bits that you can get from your local hardware store. If you can see close up here. This will save you a lot of time as far as trying to use an X-Acto knife. These go through the flash on metal models really quick, so you don't have to spend a lot of time grinding away at it. It just literally takes it off like butter. If you have old models that are pre-pewter that are lead, I do not recommend using these bits because it'll actually just dig right in there and it'll build up on the bit itself. You can keep scraping the bit off, but it's really just kind of a waste of time. You're better off using an X-Acto knife on lead models. Takes it all right down, so it's nice and flat. Gets rid of any sort of extra stuff there. So yeah, definitely pick up a set of these at your local hardware store. I think I paid like $12 for them, so it's not bad. I got mine at Menards. If you have a Menards near you, otherwise check out like Northern Tool or something like that. But they're called diamond tip bits, and they're really great for a Dremel. This would definitely come apart if I didn't pin this. This is going to get handled a lot. On parts that don't get handled a lot, if you're literally just going to throw it in the showcase, you might not necessarily need to pin it, but this is going to get played with a lot, so I definitely have to pin this. Probably put 2 in each side. You don't have to put 1 in all 3, but you just need probably 2 in each one of these pieces. And even though there's a lot of glue surface for this part, I am going to put a pin in this one as well. These other pieces don't necessarily need it. They'll be able to be held up by glue. This can be held up by glue. This one, dorsal fins, I'm definitely going to pin those because those will get bumped a lot and those will come loose. And these other little pieces are small enough that they should be fine without pins. But the fins and these parts are definitely going to need to be pinned. So I'm going to switch out my bit. I'm going to switch to a drill bit. So just pick your size and pick your brass rod. So if you line those up, if you can see the brass rod behind there, then your brass rod is the wrong size for this drill bit. So you're going to want to get a bigger drill bit. For the smaller fins, I'm going to probably end up having to use a pin vise instead of my Dremel, just because I don't want to take a chance of going offline and putting it through the side. So definitely get yourself one of these. Games Workshop makes this particular one, and this, I don't know, I can't say enough good things about this. This is perfect. So definitely get yourself one of those. You can't see the brass rod behind there, so this would be perfect for that. So this is a different size. It's smaller. Like I mentioned, make sure that I don't damage the fins. I should also mention Dremel speed. So I have mine set at the lowest. It's at 5. I find that that's more than enough for pretty much all of the miniatures that I do. If you start to go higher, what'll end up happening is it'll burn through the stuff quicker, but you also take a chance of when it catches, spinning that baby out of your hand. And that's just not good. Or it also will snap drill bits quicker because everything heats up faster. So I find having the lowest setting is probably the best way to go. So that's what I would recommend. And mine's a Dremel 4000. There's lots of Dremels out there. I actually have a cordless Dremel as well. I don't use it very often except for on plastics. This one I use for pretty much all the metals, and sometimes even on plastic. Because the speed is low enough. The cordless one actually has a lower speed, so it works a little better on plastics. It doesn't it doesn't gum up the bits as fast as this one does. But because it's plastic, you can just scrape it off if it does gum it up a little bit. But I find if you just are taking your time with it rather than trying to make it go all in one go, it won't gum up the bit as much.
You speak in meaningless riddles.
I'm actually going to mark it. So what I typically do is find a spot that makes sense. Now if you look here, we have these two grooves which will help hold this end in. It's almost like a pin itself, but I need something up in here to help hold it. So that is where I'm going to try to find a spot to make my mark. And so there's several spots along here that have turrets. I feel like there's 4 of them. And so if I pick one of those spots, that'll be a good place to have it, because it'll be easy enough to line up. So I just made a little mark right behind where that turret is. And take that piece away. And now I have my dot. So I'm going to go ahead and drill the hole and do the same on the other side once I'm done with this side. I should mention too, when drilling, let the tool do the work. Don't over push it, because that's actually when either the bit will break, it'll bind, or you take a chance of it slipping and it'll actually go off into your fingers, which is not good. I'm sure we've all experienced that in the past. So just let the tool do the work. If you're finding that the tool does not do the work and you have to press it extra hard, that is actually time to change out your bit.
You speak in meaningless riddles.
I'm going to test to make sure I drilled it correctly. You can see the big heavy piece even is held up by that brass rod. And so that's why we're doing this. It will hold a lot of weight, and you're better off having this happen than having to keep repairing it and try to touch it up later with super gluing. So after giving this another look, I am going to actually drill another hole down here in between these 2 spaces. I don't have to mark this with a marker because I basically do have 2 lines to line it up with. So I'm going to put a hole in the middle of that one there, and then actually a hole in the middle of this part here. If you're drilling and it happens to bind up, which it did here for me, don't keep drilling, because you'll bust the bit, or it'll catch and it'll spin the piece out of your hand, which would be bad. Or you can overheat your Dremel, which is also bad. So what I end up doing is I shut it off immediately. Give it a second, because the piece is going to be warm. That's part of the reason why it probably bound up. And then you're going to grab the piece here, and you're just going to gently start moving the bit back and forth, holding the piece and holding the end of your Dremel. And you're going to work it until it loosens up, and then you back it out. Again, I'm going to take my marker and mark the side, just like I did on the other side. I'm going to mark it right where the turret is. You're just putting a little black mark there. It doesn't have to be anything too special, just enough so you can see where you have to drill. And I'm lining it up directly in the middle behind the turret. And that's just kind of my way of doing things, is it's always right in the middle behind things or next to things or whatever. But anytime you can go directly in the middle, it's always the best, because then when you get around to assembling this, you don't have to re-drill holes and things, because usually you're pretty right on if you're lining up in the center of spots. Again, we're going to give it the shake test. It's always the best way to find out if you did enough or not. So get that in there. Oh yeah, we're good. So the top piece here that goes on there, this actually doesn't need a brass rod. It's got a little knob there, as you can see, and there's a spot actually for it that they've already done. So that'll fit on there nicely, and then glue will hold that, no problem. Now I'm going to switch to do the fins. I'm going to definitely switch to a smaller drill bit, of course, because of the size there. I'm going to try it with my Dremel first. If it starts to go offline at all, I'm going to switch and do it with the pin vise instead. So it didn't go offline on either one of those. It actually went through pretty good. One of them started to go a little askew, but when that happens, if you're not too far into drilling your pilot hole there, just readjust and then go a little further down rather than try to switch out and do something else. So this worked out pretty good. And again, we'll give it the shake test to see if we got down far enough with our pilot holes. Yep, and it'll hold it. It'll hold it, so yep, definitely good. So I went ahead and did the other dorsal fin. That went pretty smooth as well. I did those in the same spots I did on the other ones. So now I'm going to drill the holes into the body. And we're going to do our same technique there. We're going to find out where they go, and then I'm going to mark it, and then drill the holes.
You speak in meaningless riddles.
So I lined it up there, and this is definitely a time where you're going to want to make those marks, because otherwise there's just no way to line it up on there. If you look, there's just a rounded piece where it's supposed to sit on, and you glue it to there. There's no way if you just glue that there that thing's going to stay. This thing's pretty heavy. This is, you know, a flat surface. You're going to be moving these around a lot. You're going to bump that off of there, so you're going to definitely want to drill some holes there. So I'm going to mark that, drill my holes, and we'll go on to the other one. Now the weird part about this is you're going to have to decide if you're going to want to drill in straight and then just bend it over once you glue it together, or drill it a little bit of an angle to get that angle that you see on the dorsal fins there. I have decided to drill it a little bit of an angle, and I can kind of finagle it once I get further on in the assembly if I need to. So when I was drilling, one of the holes, because I had decided to go at an angle, actually started to come through on the bottom there. I just slowed down a little bit and repositioned the bit just enough to send it off into the right direction there. So luckily it didn't come through in a weird spot. This is the underside, so even if it was there a little bit, you'd probably never see it because once it's painted up. But I did just reposition the bit a little bit and then send it in the right direction. So actually both of these started to go offline a little bit. And when I say offline, I mean it just basically goes where I don't want it to go. And so both of these started to do that, so I repositioned it a little bit, managed to keep it on track. This one here, this front one is actually worse than the back one, but again, it started to come through the side, right there. This is the underside. Repositioned it and put it down into the right spot. So the pilot holes worked out both good on both of these after repositioning it. But just go slow when you're doing this. And as you can see, I offset them. So I drilled the holes differently, so that way in assembly I don't confuse myself when I'm putting the dorsal fins on. So I got two towards the back here and two towards the front there, and that was actually on purpose so I can assemble faster and just not confuse myself on what goes where. I managed to get all the holes drilled in these pieces here, and like I mentioned, the top part here will just be able to sit in there and I don't have to drill a hole. But now actually looking at this thing, even with that said, these other little fiddly bits here, these are going to bust off if I just glue these on. They just will. So there's a lot of little fiddly bit holes kind of things. This will glue inside. It's kind of a drop-in fit, so I don't have to worry about this piece here. This you can just drop in and it'll sit there just fine because it's not going to get handled a lot, that particular spot, because it's in the middle there. So I won't have to worry about this one, but I won't have to worry about the little turrets. I am going to drill holes in these, and I do have a lot of holes to drill on these other little parts. The turrets are fine, so we'll just set those in the done pile. There's lots of assembly on these little pieces here, so even though there's little tiny holes here where these are supposed to line up and hold that in there, that's never going to hold it. That's going to get bumped once or twice and that thing's going to come loose. So I'm going to nip off that little end piece that they used for assembly, and actually then I have a flat surface to drill into. Again, I'm going to go with the smaller drill bit and drill into the center here and there. So I'll do that for both of these. So like I mentioned, I got rid of that little nub there, and that gives me a flat surface to drill into. Also, with tiny fiddly bits like this, they tend to heat up quicker. So I got about halfway through this one, and now I have to switch to the other one for a minute to let this cool down, and then I'll come back to this piece. So it's okay to set it aside for a second, just so you don't burn your fingers. Again, we'll give it the shake test. Yeah, that's not gonna go anywhere. This one could maybe, well, I might drill this one just a little bit deeper. Let's see about the other one here. Yeah, that one should be okay. I'm going to drill this first one a little bit deeper, and then I'm going to move on to the other pieces here. So this one here, I'm going to do the same thing, except for because the nub is bigger on this one, I'm going to leave it there, and that'll actually help support it. I'm going to drill right in the center of these nubs. These are the little spire pieces that go up the side there. You see it right here in the picture there. So I'm going to drill those holes, and then I'll be right back. So I drilled the 2 holes that I needed on the top piece there. And then I also drilled in for the spires. So I got that for both of them. I gave them the shake test, so they're both fine. So I'm going to move on to the next piece here, which is going to be this part. This piece is the top piece, it's the bridge. So I'm going to drill that because it's definitely not going to stay there again. They didn't really leave any spots. There's a little knob that's supposed to hold it, but that's definitely not going to hold anything. It's a super tiny knob. So I'm going to drill a hole in this piece here and also in that piece for the bridge. And then I'm going to move on, last but not least, and do the fins. That one there, again, I don't necessarily, it's these side pieces on the bridge. I don't necessarily think that that little thing that they put on there, there's a little notch. That's not going to help hold anything either, so I'm going to need to drill a hole for that. But we're going to do this first part here for the bridge. I should mention, because this is the tiny piece, it's going to heat up quick, and so you're going to want to go this in stages. So you're going to go maybe about a quarter of the way, give it a second, let it cool off, and then go a quarter of the way, give it a second, cool off. Because otherwise, if you try to go all the way through, it's going to heat up. You're going to not necessarily burn your fingers, but what happens is you end up losing your grip on it a little bit, and then if it binds, it's going to kick this thing right out of your hand. So definitely make sure that you are wearing your goggles when you're doing this, just for that reason. If it happens to kick out of your hand, the hardest part there is finding it once it's gone. So I'm going to finish drilling the other hole, and I'm going to finish drilling the other pilot hole on this top piece here. Drilled the hole for the bridge. Again, we're going to put that in there, give it the shake test. And you see it's just fine. So if you can hold it up with it, it's good. Perfect. And then last but not least, I'm going to go on to these little pieces here. Like I said, there's little notches, so I'll be able to see exactly where to drill in the side part. This goes into the main top piece. I'll go on the side there. So.
You speak in meaningless riddles.
Now that I got this far, even though I said several times that that knob in this glue space was going to be enough, I got this far, I'm looking at it, and I realize all the other little fiddly bits I could attach to this thing. So this is going to end up weighing a lot by the time it's done. Not a lot in terms of, you know, hey, this is a 15-pound dumbbell or anything like that, but as far as miniatures go, it's going to get bumped a lot when you're moving things around because it's the top part of the ship. So I have decided, after all, to drill another hole in the center of that knob and into the center of the hole on the ship, and that'll help support this. Chances are it would never come loose with that knob and this glue surface, but like I said, there's a lot of fiddly bits getting attached to this, and so I've managed to drill holes for all of that stuff. I might as well just go the extra mile and drill a hole there too. All the way down to the end, I got these last 2 holes drilled. And so now the next phase of this is to actually clean up your workspace, because all of these little tiny bits, when you're gluing things, they're going to catch on stuff, catch on your fingers, and so you just don't want this mess. So I'm going to clean up all of the metal shavings here, and then we'll move on to assembly. So I rearranged these by what size brass rod goes where. So these are all the smaller ones, these are all the bigger ones, and so I'm going to go ahead and put all of the pins in. I'll show you how I do a few of them as I go here, because there is kind of a technique to this as well. And so it's kind of assembly as you go. You're going to want to make sure that you have somewhere to set the thing as you're doing it, so you're not bumping pieces that you have already done, because that is really frustrating. This ship should go together pretty smoothly because I've pre-drilled all the holes and I've cleaned up my station, so I shouldn't have any gunk that gets in there as I'm assembling. Gorilla Glue. Best glue on the market as far as I'm concerned. Super glue is what I use. I used to use the GW stuff. Nothing against GW as far as their glues and things go. I just find that Gorilla Glue works better for when I'm doing it, and it's actually a little less expensive. So I definitely recommend you get some of this. So this is what I'll be using to assemble. So I have all the pins in the smaller pieces. Now I'm going to do the bigger pieces. So I'm done with that size brass rod. I'm going to move on to the other one. And what I do here is just leave about maybe a little less than 1/4 of an inch sticking out. And then once these dry, we'll dry fit it and see if they work. If they're a little long, we'll trim them. I don't slather on glue and try to assemble them right away. I let these pieces dry a little bit so then I can dry fit them onto the other parts. So I'm going to move on to doing the larger size brass rod. So when I was trying to put the brass rod in this part here, I realized I didn't get this one deep enough. I did give it the shake test on this one, but I must have missed that one, so I'm going to have to go back and drill the hole a little deeper on there. So we'll set that aside and do the other parts first, and then I'll go back and re-drill that hole. That way I don't make a mess of my station and then have to clean it up again in between here. Now that I have all my pins where they belong, I'm going to go back and drill this hole a little bit deeper. And then once I get that far, the next step is going to be, once these pieces go on, these front spires actually have to have spots drilled for them as well. So I'll get all of those side pieces on, and then I'll actually have to drill some more holes going in the front here. Alright, so now that I drilled a couple extra holes that I had missed, I'm going to clean up again real quick. And just wipe down my space, get any extra little bits off of here. And so now I'm going to go into the assembly part. This is the fun part where you see it finally start to come together. Like I mentioned, while you're doing this, you're going to want to make sure you have somewhere to set this thing. So you're not bumping parts that you just got done putting together. So for me, I'm going to initially try using the stand that's for the Planet Killer. We'll see how that goes. The GW plastic stands don't typically work super well, but I always use them until they break, and then I drill a hole in further because it gives you 2 or 3 uses out of it before you have problems. Sometimes I'll replace the stem with a brass rod too, just to get rid of that problem. But sometimes when you do that, you actually have to replace the base itself too. And then I use actually the GW regular bases, like a 60 millimeter or whatever you need to. And then I'll put washers and stuff in there to hold a nail, and I'll use a nail instead of the plastic part. But I'm going to start with the GW one, the plastic clear stands for this. I'm going to use that to help hold it up as I'm assembling it here and there. As you can see, I've already primed this one black, and so it does balance on there fairly well. It's going to be good enough for the purposes of assembly anyway, and then I'll figure out afterwards if I'm going to use this base or if I'm going to upgrade to. If you see that there's large gaps, which there definitely is on this one, the best way to do this is, during this part of the process, is to slather on a little extra glue. You don't go crazy here, but you just want a little bit extra glue in the gap. Now you can spend your time filling this stuff with green stuff. There's lots of putties on the market. You can do that, but I find that a little bit of baking soda, just gently sprinkled in the spots that need it, does the exact same thing. Especially if you're not concerned about this being super smooth, which I'm not. Even if you were, there's ways to fix that as well. So I'll flip it over and go underneath. And when this hits the super glue, it pretty much crystallizes and hardens almost immediately. So now that you got that on there, don't blow it forward because then you get it all over your workspace here. Just kind of take it to the side real quick. And blow it off. You can see that there's quite a bit of it on here. So then you take a brush that you don't really care about. I always keep extra brushes handy and around. The reason why I say ones that you don't care about is there might be a little bit of super glue residue sitting around on there, and you're not going to want to drag your brush through it, especially one of your good brushes. So definitely not a Winsor Newton or anything fun like that. The Series 7, yeah, take your best Series 7 and drag it through there. Don't do that. So then you're just going to drag this along here and get rid of the extras. Again, take it off of your table as much as you can. So it's kind of out of sight here, but I'm just kind of dusting it off here to get the extra off. And give it another look. Underneath, I probably want to do it a little more underneath. The stuff that I had sprinkled on there went in the gaps pretty good, but once it dries completely, it is sandable just like everything else. So you won't have a problem touching this up if you need to with some fine grit sandpaper. And I'm using paintbrushes. You can buy these for like $2, $2.50, something like that at Michael's. That's where I get these from. And these are great for base work, just about anything. When you're done with them, you just toss them, but the bristles are actually pretty good on them, so they last quite a while. But as you can see, that got rid of most of the gap, and that'll paint up really well. So like I said, I might just hit this really lightly with some fine sandpaper once it dries. So now that I got that center spire on here, and I did know that I was going to have to drill more holes, I'm looking, and now I'm figuring out that even though I know I have to drill more holes, I'm not going to be able to get my Dremel anywhere near there with that center spire on there. So now this is a problem. I think I'm going to solve it because I have the 2 pins on the ends, which I thought would help support it the best. I'm going to solve it by leaving this end one, but I'm going to take and pull this one out and move it over to here. And I think I'll be able to get the Dremel in that spot. Yeah, so I'll be able to get the Dremel in that spot if I bump that over a little bit. So what I'm going to do here, before I switch out and try to pull that pin, I am going to see if I can line this bad boy up and do it with my pin vise instead, because I only have one hole to drill here to make that happen. So I'm going to try that first. We'll see how it goes. So after quite a bit of finagling and shaving some things off, drilling that extra hole on the end there did end up working. This ended up working fairly well. It's a pretty solid fit. That's never going to come off of there once I glue that bad boy on there. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the other side before I glue this side, because if I glue that side in, chances are I'm going to bend this stuff up while I'm fiddling with this side. So I'm going to drill the holes over here, dry fit that one, and then I'll glue them both in. I got the holes drilled on the other side, got the spire in there. This one was actually a little better fit. So there we go. And now I'm going to glue both of those in. Got both sides on. Looks pretty straight, pretty solid. If they're off just a little bit, you can kind of just tweak them and bend them where you want them to go. They're pretty bendy. I would recommend being careful with these older metal models though, because they did sometimes have gaps inside when they there's little pockets in there, and sometimes that just lends things to snap if you start tweaking them too much. So just be careful with it. But this one looks pretty good. Lined up pretty well. And so now we're going to go on to the little fiddly bits. And as you're working with the baking soda, you'll notice it starts to get here and there, so I do typically wipe down my space a little bit in between, because you don't want that dust all over your model. Even when you're done with the model, I actually do go back sometimes and rinse them off, because basically handling it this much, there's oils on your fingers that's going to get on there, which will take down the adherence of the paint, and then also the baking soda and stuff, it is dusty, so I do tend to rinse them off once this thing is completely assembled, and then I let it dry overnight and then spray it. Alright, I literally fiddled with that center star for 20-25 minutes because I wanted it to be exact. It's like the cherry on the top on this baby. And if you get that wrong, you're going to be staring at that every time you play and just think, man, I should have spent a couple extra minutes on it. So I did. And I got it lined up as best I could. It actually is a tight fit in there, so now I'm going to just slap some glue on it. And we're getting there. This is getting close to being a ship worthy of Abaddon himself. Alright, now that we got the glue in there, that's all set. Put on some baking soda to kind of lock it in place. Everything's looking good on this guy. Now just the very final bits. We're going to put on the little turrets. If you like this build and would like to see other things like this on the channel, comment down below. And also, if you could do me a favor, like, share, and subscribe. Be part of the Horde.
Answer me or die now!
And we'll see you in the next one where I paint this guy up. Stay tuned for that.
Seek the hand of darkness. Take the eye of night. With these, the citadels will be yours to command. A chorus of 1,000,000,000 throats will cry your name in fear and hatred. The stars themselves will run